Chapter 10. Brenda? Brenda, are you okay? Brenda's parents burst into the room a few moments later, followed by Hallie and Randy. Brenda's shoulders heaved. She pointed to the still glowing pumpkin. It's so awful. Ugh, what's that smell? Mrs. Morgan demanded, holding her fingers over her nose. Blow out the candle, Mr. Morgan instructed Haley. Haley moved reluctantly to obey. Mrs. Morgan put an arm around Brenda's quaking shoulders. Let's get you cleaned up. Haley did it, Brenda shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at her cousin. Haley's eyes grew wide with surprise. She took a step back from the desk, as if pushed back by the force of Brenda's accusation. Haley put it in there. She's trying to drive me crazy, Brenda screamed, out of control. I did not, Hallie protested angrily, tossing her hair behind her shoulders of her red sweater. I don't even know what it is. She did it, Brenda accused, as her mother struggled to lead her out of the room. Brenda, stop, her father said quietly. Let's get everything cleaned up and get this disgusting pumpkin out of here. Then maybe we can talk calmly and rationally. No, Brenda wailed. No, we can't. Not while she's here. Her mother led her to the bathroom to get her cleaned up. Randy, go get the sponge mop and bucket in the kitchen, Brenda heard her father say. Why can't Brenda do it? She heard her brother whine. She made the mess. I really don't know why Brenda is accusing me, Haley said coldly, her blue eyes glaring across the table at Brenda. They were all seated at the kitchen table under the bright cone of white light from the low ceiling fixture above their heads. Mr. and Mrs. Morgan were next to each other at one end. Randy sat eating a bowl of frosted flakes at the other. Brenda, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, avoided Hallie's stare from across the table. I wasn't even in Brenda's room, Hallie continued shrilly. I never go in Brenda's room. I don't go where I'm not wanted. Brenda frowned down at her tea and didn't reply. Well, somebody is vandalizing Brenda's room, Mr. Morgan said quietly, his hands clasped together on the table. These acts of vandalism aren't being done by a ghost, he raised his eyes to Randy. Hey, Randy cried, a white milk mustache above his lips. He dropped his spoon into the cereal bowl. Don't look at me. Are these your little jokes, Randy? Mrs. Morgan asked, keeping her voice low and soft. Both of her parents, Brenda realized, were trying to keep the discussion calm and under control, but Brenda could feel her heart pounding, the blood throbbing at her temples. She wanted to scream. She wanted to leap across the table and tear Hallie's hair out. No way, Randy was protesting. No way, Mom, it wasn't me. Someone must have broken in, Hallie suggested. Someone had to break in through Brenda's window, maybe. That's impossible, Brenda muttered, still not raising her eyes. She had a sour taste in her mouth. She didn't want to be sitting here discussing this so calmly. She wanted her parents to get tough with Hallie, to force Hallie to tell the truth. But who would do these things, Mrs. Morgan asked. Who would do such awful things to you, Bren, and why? Brenda shrugged. Ask Hallie, she replied bitterly. Stop accusing me, Hallie cried. Mr. Morgan raised both hands. Let's keep our voices down. Let's try to stay. Just stop accusing me, Hallie screamed at Brenda. You did it. You did it, Brenda screamed back, losing control. Brenda, stop, Mr. Morgan yelled. Don't yell at me. Yell at her, Brenda wailed. She accidentally bumped the mug with her hand, sending tea splashing across the white Formica table. Hallie jumped to her feet, her blue eyes flashing angrily. You've been so horrible to me ever since I came here. You never gave me a chance, Brenda. What did I do to you, huh? What did I ever do to you? Tears formed in Hallie's eyes and rolled down her pale cheeks. Don't listen to her, Brenda desperately cried to her parents. Don't listen to that. She's evil. I know you won't believe me, but Hallie is evil. I don't believe this. I want to go home, Hallie shrieked. She shoved her chair back so hard it toppled over backwards. As it clattered loudly to the linoleum, Hallie fled from the room, sobbing uncontrollably. She's evil. Evil, Brenda shrieked. Brenda, stop, Mr. Morgan demanded, standing up and putting a hand firmly on her trembling shoulder. Stop. Get yourself together. Brenda, I expected so much more of you, her mother said through clenched teeth. Hallie is going through such a tough time. I can't believe your attitude toward her. It's sick, Brenda. It's really sick. Go to bed. Get some sleep, Brenda's father ordered. And tomorrow I want you to apologize to your cousin, Mrs. Morgan said sternly, shaking her head. Avoiding her parents' eyes, Brenda climbed to her feet and stumbled out of the kitchen. Can I have more frosted flakes? She heard Randy ask as she started up the stairs to her room. So, did you apologize to Hallie? Dinah asked. Brenda had met her in the lunchroom at school the next afternoon, and they'd settled into a corner of the vast, noisy room to talk. As they had pulled their sandwiches and yogurt containers from their lunch bags, Brenda had related the unpleasant events of the night before. As she told Dinah this story, she found herself growing even angrier. "No, I didn't apologize," she shouted at Dinah. "No way I'll ever apologize to her." "Whoa, calm down," Dinah said, a little surprised by Brenda's emotional reaction. "You can't let her get to you, Bren." I can't help it," Brenda replied, struggling to punch the little straw through the top of her juice box. I just... "You look terrible," Dinah interrupted. "Look at the dark rings around your eyes. You look like a raccoon." She ripped open a bag of potato chips. "You're letting her get to you, Bren. You're letting her win." "You're not cheering me up," Brenda said sharply. Dinah pushed the bag of potato chips across the table to her. "Have some. Potato chips always cheer me up." Brenda glanced down at the bag, but didn't take any. It's not just Haley, you know. It's my parents," she said, shaking her head sadly. "They just take Haley's side no matter what." "Weird," Dinah muttered through a mouthful of peanut butter and jelly. "Hallie smears blood on my wall and puts a disgusting dead bird in my room with a threatening note, and my parents say I'm not being understanding of her." Dinah swallowed a small section of her sandwich. "It's ridiculous," she agreed. "It just isn't fair," Brenda continued bitterly. She still hadn't touched a bite of the lunch. "How can I be understanding? Haley is a monster. A monster!" Dinah reached across the table and squeezed Brenda's hand. "Have some lunch. You'll feel better, really." Brenda moaned and rolled her eyes. "I'll never feel better. Not while Haley is in my house. You know, I never even told my parents about Haley and Ted. How she tried to steal my boyfriend. Can you imagine? Living in the same house and trying to steal my boyfriend?" "But you and Ted are okay now, right?" Dinah asked, her small dark eyes studying Brenda's face. Brenda started to reply when someone grabbed her shoulders from behind and cried, "Guess who?" Startled, she spun around. "Ted!" she cried. "Speak of the devil," Dinah said, laughing. Ted lowered his gaze to Dinah. "You were talking about me?" "Don't get a swelled head," Brenda told him. "We weren't saying anything nice." Ted leaned over Brenda to reach for Dinah's potato chip bag. He grabbed a handful of chips and stuffed them into his mouth. "Can I have some chips?" he asked Dinah, crunching loudly. "No," she joked. "Give those back." He opened his mouth so she could see the chewed-up chips. "Here." "You're so gross," Brenda complained. "I've got to go," Dinah said, jamming what was left of her sandwich into the brown lunch bag. "I'll come over later, okay, Bren?" "Yeah, good," Brenda told her. "I have to work on my government paper, but come anyway." "Thanks for the chips," Ted said. He finished off the bag, crinkled it up, and tossed it onto the table. "Any time," Dinah told him. "Bye." She headed toward the exit. "She's so tall," Ted said, pulling back the chair beside Brenda and lowering himself over the chair back. "She should try out for basketball." "She hates basketball," Brenda told him, making a face. "And don't ever say anything like that to Dinah. She's terribly sensitive about her height." "What will she do if I call her Beanpole?" Ted asked, opening Brenda's yogurt container. "What flavor is this? You want it?" "You can have it," Brenda said with a sigh. "I'm not very hungry. Her voice trailed off because she suddenly realized Ted wasn't listening. He was staring at something across the room. "Ted?" What was he staring at so intently? Following his gaze, she saw what had grabbed Ted's attention. Haley had entered their lunchroom, snuggling against Noah. Noah, she saw, had his arm around Haley's shoulder. Haley leaned her head against his chest as they walked. What a touching scene, Brenda thought sarcastically. She returned her gaze to Ted and felt a cold shudder run down her back. As he watched Haley cling so closely to Noah, Ted had the strangest expression on his face. An expression Brenda had never seen before. Sadness and envy and anger all mixed together. That evening after dinner, Brenda was leaning over the keyboard, staring at the amber screen of her computer monitor. She was trying to make some progress on the government paper. Randy had interrupted twice, begging her to come and see how he'd made it up to the 10th level of some Super Nintendo game. She'd finally had to shut the bedroom door to keep him out. She tried to concentrate on the powers of the Supreme Court, but her mind kept wandering. When Dinah's voice behind her called out, "How's it going?" Brenda nearly jumped out of her chair. "Sorry," Dinah apologized, pulling off her leopard skin-style jacket. "I didn't mean to scare you. Your mom let me in." "I thought you were Randy," Brenda said. She sighed. "I'm not getting too far with this paper." Dinah was wearing straight-legged black jeans and an oversized green cotton turtleneck. She stepped up behind Brenda and studied the monitor screen. "Well, you spelled your name right at the top. That's a good start." Thanks for your support, Brenda replied dryly. How'd it go with Ted at lunch? Are you two okay now? Dinah asked, backing up to the bed and dropping down onto it. Brenda spun her chair around to face the bed. I don't know. I guess we're okay. It's not like before, though. Ted and we're not real comfortable with each other, and I caught him staring at Haley and Noah with the weirdest look on his face. Uh-oh, Dinah muttered. You're still going to the homecoming thing with him? Yeah, I guess, Brenda shrugged. Speaking of Noah, where's Tracy tonight? Dinah asked, drawing patterns with her finger on Brenda's bedspread. Is she coming over? Are we going to work on her murder? Brenda shook her head. Tracy had to go somewhere with her parents, to some cousin's house or something. She can't come. Tracy has a million cousins, Dinah said wistfully. I wish I had a big family. The remark surprised Brenda. You do? How come? Well, it gets kind of lonely, just Mom and me, Dinah replied, staring out the window at the darkening night. After the divorce, all of Dad's relatives just kind of dropped us, as if we weren't part of the family anymore, as if we just didn't exist. It was weird. I guess, Brenda replied awkwardly, and then she added, You can have my cousin if you want. Dinah snickered. No thanks. You keep her. As if on cue, Haley appeared in the doorway. Brenda, she cried, her features twisted in alarm, her hands gripping the sides of her hair. She burst into the room. Brenda, she repeated in a tight, frightened voice. I'm so sorry. There's been a horrible accident. A horrible accident. Chapter 11. Down the stairs, out through the front door. Brenda followed Haley, her heart pounding, Haley's frightened voice echoing in her ears. Where is she taking me? Why are we running outside like this? Brenda wondered. Into a cold, clear night, the shock of the cold against her thin t-shirt made Brenda shudder. Goosebumps climbed up her arms. The front porch light was on, casting a triangle of pale yellow light toward the driveway. Brenda could hear her footsteps behind her, Dinah following in silence. Haley, what is it? Where? Brenda's voice, so shrill, so tiny. Darkness encircled them. The wind tried to push Brenda back. Haley stopped suddenly at the edge of the drive. Her hands rose to her face. Brenda saw the car. Her prized Geo. The passenger side was pushed in. Brenda suddenly pictured a crushed soda can. The windows were shattered. The door appeared to be bent in half. It wasn't my fault, Haley told her in a trembling voice, her hands still pressed against her face, her blonde hair ruffled wildly in the gusting wind, rising and falling about her head. Huh? Brenda gaped in horror at her car, all crunched and shattered and bent. I didn't see the stop sign, Haley told her, keeping her distance. I don't know this neighborhood very well. The stop sign was kind of hidden. Brenda couldn't take her eyes off the car. You went through a stop sign? But it wasn't my fault, Haley cried. The other car. It shouldn't have been going so fast. If it had been going slower, then it could have stopped. So you see... Something snapped inside Brenda. If only Haley had apologized. If only she hadn't made the stupid excuse. If only she had stopped. The blue car appeared to flame up in Brenda's mind. The dark sky flared red. The driveway became a molten red river. The ground glowed bright red. And then everything went white. Brenda closed her eyes. It was all too bright, too frightening, and when she opened them, Haley was still talking, still saying that it wasn't her fault, and Brenda opened her mouth and let out a hideous roar of anger, and before she even realized she was moving, she leapt at Haley, and her hands wrapped around Haley's throat, and they were down on the cold, hard driveway, surrounded by blackness, all black now, rolling in the shadows, grunting and crying, and the screams Brenda heard were far in the distance. Was that Dinah screaming so far away? Were Brenda's hands really pulling so hard at Haley's hair now? Was Brenda really on top of Haley, trying to cut off her breath? Were they really rolling on the wet grass over and over, their cries mingling with their groans of anger? It wasn't real until the strong hands squeezed Brenda's shoulders. It wasn't real until Brenda felt herself being pulled roughly away, being lifted up off her cousin, her hands thrashing wildly, her breath coming in short whimpers. It was all red again, blinding red, throbbing red, and then it was black. And then she was staring into the pale porch light, and Haley was still on her back in the grass, and Brenda's father was holding her firmly, his hands locked on her quaking shoulders. What on earth? What on earth? His words repeated in a frantic chant in her ear, and her mother was screaming, and Randy looked so thin and confused, hunched at the edge of the driveway, shivering with his arms crossed in front of his slender chest, and everyone was screaming and crying. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. Haley repeated her high-pitched refrain. It was an accident, just an accident. It wasn't my fault. Mrs. Morgan, helping Haley to her feet, brushing the wet grass and dirt off Haley's jacket. It wasn't my fault, Haley's face all mud-stained. Of course it wasn't an accident. You did it, Haley. You did it to my car. And suddenly, the fight was over. The energy was gone. Brenda surrendered to the weariness of her muscles, the overload of her brain. Her shoulders slumped. Her head drooped. Brenda, are you finished? Can I let go now? Mr. Morgan asked, his mouth right behind her ear, his hands holding her in their firm grip. Is it over, Brenda? Can you control yourself now? Yes, a whispered reply. She shivered. It was so cold and dark. She stared at her car, a crushed soda can. Brenda, are you calm? Are you finished? Yes. It was just an accident, Mrs. Morgan said, her arm around Haley's shoulders. Why is she hugging Haley and not me? Brenda wondered. It was just an accident, Brenda, her mother repeated, eyeing her so coldly. We should be grateful that Haley wasn't hurt. Brenda caught a flash in Haley's eyes. It was there for less than a second, but Brenda caught it, a gleam of triumph, of victory. I don't understand you, Brenda, Mrs. Morgan scolded. Haley is okay. That's the main thing. I'll kill her, Brenda decided, gasping in the cold, wet air, her chest still heaving, her head throbbing. I'll kill her for real. I really will. Chapter 12. Dinah, her hair still wet from the shower, called Tracy before school the next morning. Cradling the phone under her chin, she hunted for her sneakers under the bed as she waited for Tracy to answer the phone. Hello? Tracy's voice was still hoarse from sleep. Tracy, it's me. Dinah? What time is it? I'm running a little late this morning, Tracy said. She cleared her throat loudly. Wish I could get back into bed. You don't want to miss Mr. Friedman's surprise quiz, do you? Dinah asked. She located one sneaker, but there was no trace of the second one. He has a surprise quiz every day, Tracy groaned. Big deal. Dinah could hear Tracy's mother in the background yelling something. I know, Mom, Tracy shouted. Listen, Dinah. What do you want? Everyone around here seems to be totally freaked out this morning. Dinah hesitated. I can only find one sneaker, she muttered, searching the cluttered closet floor. That's why you called? Tracy demanded impatiently. Look, I haven't even brushed my teeth and I... No, Dinah interrupted. She spotted the sneaker on her desk chair, on top of a pile of dirty laundry. I called because I'm really worried about Brenda. Tracy cleared her throat again. Brenda? What's Brenda's problem? And then she quickly added, what did Haley do this time? Wrecked her car, Dinah said. Oh, wow, Tracy moaned. Not the Geo. Brenda loves that car. Hallie practically totaled it, Dinah told her friend, and Brenda went psycho. She freaked. She tried to strangle Hallie in the driveway. It was horrible. The two of them were crying and wrestling around on the ground. I think Brenda was really trying to kill her. Oh, wow, Tracy repeated. That's bad. Mr. Morgan had to pull them apart, Dinah reported. Is Brenda okay? Tracy asked. You mean is she hurt? No, she wasn't hurt. But I think she's really messed up. Dinah's voice broke. I'm so worried about her. She'll be even more messed up when I tell her what I saw yesterday afternoon, Tracy revealed. And then she shouted, I'll be off in 1 minute, Mom. Give me a break, okay? Huh? Tracy, what did you see? What are you talking about? Dinah demanded, standing in front of the dresser mirror and trying to brush her wet hair as she talked. I have to get off. My mom is having a cow, Tracy exclaimed. You have to tell me, Dinah insisted. Tracy lowered her voice. After school yesterday, I stayed late. I had some stuff to do in the computer lab. Anyway, I went out to the back, by the student parking lot, and I recognized the car parked in the corner back by the practice field. The only car still in the lot. It was Ted's red Honda. Yeah, so? Dinah asked impatiently. So Ted stayed after school too, big deal. No, wait, Tracy whispered. Ted was in the car, and guess who he was making out with? Haley? You won the prize, Tracy replied dryly. They were going at it like, Coming, Mom, I'm hanging up now. But I thought Ted and Brenda were back together, Dinah stammered. So does Brenda, Tracy replied. I mean, they're going to the dance tomorrow night and everything. Maybe you shouldn't tell Brenda what you saw, Tracy. She's so messed up already. Yeah, maybe, Tracy replied thoughtfully. You're probably right, Dinah. But do you believe Ted? He and Haley deserve each other, Dinah said bitterly. I was tempted to call Noah up and tell him about Ted and Haley, Tracy revealed, snickering. Noah's so dumb. He thinks Haley is only interested in him. Haley sure is messing up a lot of people, Dinah said thoughtfully. Tracy sighed. I guess you and I will be home tomorrow while everyone else is at the dance, stuffing ourselves with microwave popcorn and watching TV. I guess, Dinah replied softly. I've got to get off. I hear my mom on the steps, Tracy whispered. Bye. She hung up. Dinah replaced the receiver and carried her sneakers over to the unmade bed. She glanced at the clock on the bedside table. 10 till 8. If she didn't hurry, she was going to be late. She bent to pull on the left sneaker. Poor Brenda, she said aloud, shaking her head. Poor Brenda. Breakfast at Brenda's house was silent. Silent as a tomb, Brenda thought, spooning up her Wheaties, gazing down at the cereal bowl to avoid her mother's disapproving stare. Your father took your car to the garage early, Mrs. Morgan said finally, as Brenda was finishing her cereal. Good, Brenda muttered, still avoiding her mother's eyes. Haley had gotten up before everyone else and rushed off to school, probably so she wouldn't have to see Brenda or talk to anyone. Randy had a bad sore throat. He was sleeping late. Maybe Mrs. Morgan would take him to school at lunchtime if he was feeling better. So breakfast was just Brenda and her mother, sitting in cold silence, avoiding each other. Brenda's left elbow throbbed, and her entire right side ached and felt stiff from the fight last night, she realized. The fight. She couldn't believe she had been in an actual fight, a fight with her own cousin. Brenda sighed and pushed her chair away from the kitchen table. She'd never been in a fight in her life. I'm going now, she muttered. Her voice seemed to echo in the cold silence. Maybe the fight was a good thing, Brenda thought, desperately trying to cheer herself up. Maybe now Haley will back off. Brenda thought of her mangled car, the disgusting headless bird, the blood-smeared threat on her wall, and her anger began to grow again. These days the anger never left, she realized sadly. The anger was always there, waiting in the pit of her stomach, waiting to spread, to radiate through her entire body, until she was choked by it, strangled by her own anger, ready to kill Haley, kill her and enjoy it. She stood up and started to the hallway to get her jacket. Turning at the kitchen doorway, she glanced back at her mother. Mrs. Morgan stared at her coldly, then looked away. All day in school, Brenda had the feeling that people were staring at her. Whispered conversations seemed to end when Brenda walked by. In class and in study hall, she had the feeling that eyes were burning into the back of her head. Were kids talking about her? Had word about her fight with Haley spread so quickly around the school? She wondered if Haley was telling everyone, making sure that everyone heard her side of it first. I'd love to hear Haley's version of what happened, Brenda thought bitterly. I'll bet I know how she tells it. I was in a terrible car accident, and my evil cousin Brenda attacked me before I even had a chance to recover from the shock. Brenda had trouble concentrating all day. She kept watching for signs that people were gossiping about her. She had lunch with Ted, sitting across from him in a corner of the lunchroom. Ted seemed nervous, uncomfortable. He made a lot of jokes and kept talking really fast, which wasn't like him at all. His eyes darted around the crowded lunchroom. He kept tapping his hands on the tabletop as he ate. Brenda told him about Haley smashing up the blue Geo, but she didn't mention the fight. Was the car totaled? Can it be fixed? He asked, taking the last bite of his ham sandwich and crumpling up the brown lunch bag in his big hands. Brenda shrugged. My dad took it to the garage this morning. I guess I'll find out later. Bummer, Ted muttered, glancing over his shoulder. That was a neat car. Yeah, bummer, Brenda repeated softly. We'll take my car to the dance, he offered. Should I pick you up before the game, or do you want to meet me at the stadium? Pick me up, Brenda replied, tossing her apple across the aisle into a tall trash can. Mom gives me an apple every day, and every day I throw it away. Well, Ted grinned, you know what they say about an apple a day. If the dance is a drag, we don't have to stay, Brenda told him. The bell rang. He jumped up quickly. She had the feeling he was glad their lunch was over, as if he were eager to get away. Am I being paranoid? She wondered. I've been suspecting everyone all day. I keep feeling that everyone is talking about me and staring at me. Am I cracking up? See you later, Bren, he said. He tossed his lunch bag into the trash and hurried from the lunchroom without waiting for her. At home that evening, Brenda's mood didn't improve. Haley ate an early dinner by herself in the kitchen. Then she hurried upstairs to her room and slammed the door. When Mr. Morgan got home from work, he announced that Brenda's car could be repaired. It would be expensive, but the insurance covered most of it. Will it be like new? Brenda asked eagerly. Mr. Morgan shook his head. It'll look okay, he told Brenda, but cars are never really quite the same after an accident. Brenda nodded and took her place at the dinner table. Randy was over at a friend's down the block, so it was a quiet dinner. It doesn't feel right without Randy here to complain about my meatloaf, Mrs. Morgan said with a forced cheerfulness. Nothing seemed right to Brenda. She had the feeling her parents had a lot of things they wanted to say to her, but were forcing themselves to hold it all in. She excused herself early, having eaten half portion of the meatloaf and only a few spoons of the mashed potatoes, and hurried upstairs to work on her government report. Her parents started to talk rapidly in low whispers as soon as Brenda left the room. She knew they were talking about her. Haley sure had done a good job of splitting up this family, Brenda thought sadly. She sat down at her desk, turned on the computer, and began sifting through the notes for her paper. Tracy and Dinah came over later, a little after 8:30, to talk about the murder plot. Brenda was glad to see them at first, but her mood darkened when she realized that Tracy and Dinah were suddenly uncomfortable and tense around her too. Again, Brenda had the feeling that they weren't saying what was really on their minds, that they were holding something back. It must be my imagination, Brenda thought. They tried to outline their murder plot, step by step, with Brenda typing it onto the computer as they talked, but no one could concentrate. Tracy kept going downstairs to get drinks. Dinah had to make several phone calls. Brenda had to go help Randy, who had come home after dinner with several math problems he couldn't figure out. The three girls finally gave up. "We can finish it this weekend," Tracy said. Brenda clicked off the computer, and they went down to the kitchen for a late snack. Brenda was actually relieved when Tracy and Dinah left a little after 10. Everyone had been so tense. Brenda's side still ached. She felt so sleepy she could barely keep her eyes open. "I'm going to bed," she announced with a loud yawn to her startled parents. "At 10 o'clock? Are you sick?" Her mother glanced up from her book. "Just tired," Brenda replied. "Is Haley going to sleep too?" Mrs. Morgan asked. Brenda shrugged. "I don't know, Mom. I haven't seen her." Mrs. Morgan shook her head and tisked. "She hasn't come out of her room all night. I think she's really upset." Good, Brenda thought. She didn't say anything. She was too tired to discuss Haley. Muttering good night again, she turned and made her way, yawning, up to her bedroom. Brenda paused in front of Haley's bedroom. From the crack under the door, she could see that the light was still on inside. She wondered what Haley was doing. Wearily, she walked the rest of the way down the hall to her room. Tossing her clothes onto the chair, she slipped into a long black and white striped cotton nightshirt. She clicked off the overhead light, crept over the shag rug into the darkness, and eagerly slid under the covers. It only took a few seconds to realize that something was wrong. Brenda felt something damp on the back of her nightshirt. Squirming, she felt another damp spot on her shoulder, something wet and lumpy. "What's going on?" she wondered sleepily. It took another few minutes for her to realize that something was in the bed, something wet and bumpy beneath her. "Ah!" With a low cry of dread, she jerked upright, lowered her feet to the rug, and leapt up, shoving the covers away. The dampness clung to her back. She suddenly felt itchy all over. "What is it? What is it?" She lurched for the light switch. Her trembling hand fumbled against the dark wall until she found it. Clicking on the ceiling light, she blinked hard, forcing her eyes to adjust to the bright light, and crept to her bed. She saw the dark blobs on the sheet. Still blinking, she realized at once what they were. Wet chunks of dark, raw meat. She could smell them now. The putrid aroma invaded her nose. Rotten meat. Chunks of it spread all over the sheet. She had been lying on them. And they were moving? Why did they appear to be moving? No. Staring hard, Brenda saw the tiny white worms crawling on the meat chunks. There were so many of them. The meat appeared to move. Maggots. Maggots in her bed. Her back itched. She could feel the dampness on the back of her nightshirt. Her entire body convulsed in a shudder of disgust. Rotten meat crawling with maggots. Brenda opened her mouth to scream, then stopped. "Oh, I know," she cried aloud, staring at crawling maggots. I know. Yes, she understood now. She knew. She knew what she had to do.